Sometimes when we want to figure out what we think about something, we watch a good documentary about it. But sometimes documentaries are just propaganda meant to change the way we think or the way we tell a certain story. Think, for example, of many documentaries that you guys must have seen about, I don't know, nutrition, right? People will try to push the idea that maybe meat is healthy or maybe meat is not healthy. And they will show you different things in the documentary based on the point that they're trying to push for. And now, taking a very sharp turn from nutrition, we go into Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is a Qatari-funded news network, although I guess some might call it a Qatari propaganda network. And Al Jazeera put out a documentary in Arabic about the events of the 7th of October, detailing what exactly happened there, what did Hamas do to Israel, etc. And I'm going to talk about some of this and show you maybe very small clips because, I don't want to get copyright striked. So let's dive into it. So I kind of have to point out right off the bat, this guy, when he talks about what happened in October 7th, he talks about what happened in the Israeli towns and about what happened in the Israeli bases and from Gaza, of course. But the Arabic word that he uses to describe towns are settlements. And this kind of works together with the whole Arab narrative that basically there are no legitimate towns in Israel, right? Even the towns that were invaded on October 7th, the kibbutzim surrounded the Gaza Strip, are settlements. They're not supposed to be there. They're illegal, although this area is inside what is considered internationally, at least, to be Israel proper. That is, it's not disputed, although I guess to the Arab world it is. He goes on to describe what happened, and again, the language used here is interesting because October 7th, or as he refers to it by its Palestinian name, Tufan al-Aqsa, which translates into the flood of Al-Aqsa, right? The Al-Aqsa is the name of the mosque that stands on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So he refers to it by Tufan al-Aqsa, and it is referred to as a military operation in contrast to the Israeli response, which is referred to as a genocidal war, right? So we have a legitimate military operation using the language, and on the other side, a genocidal war against Gaza. Here's another interesting thing that I've just noticed. This video went up 5 days ago. It's number 2 on trending, and it has 5.6 million views, and it's not even in English. The guy shown here is supposed to be Izzeddin al-Haddad. He's one of the top honchos of Hamas. He's survived several Israeli attempts to assassinate him during the war, and I guess by putting them on here, they are promoting a narrative of victory, and I will soon show you how hard this documentary tries to promote a narrative of victory. But they are trying to promote this narrative of, look, the commanders are alive. Of course, most of the chain of command has been eliminated, but they pick this one guy who, I guess, symbolically or not, bears the name Izzeddin al-Haddad. Why is this important? Because Izzeddin al-Qassam is the name of the military wing of Hamas. So to have someone with this name talk to the camera, even though he has a blurred face, and I guess we don't really know if it's him, right? But let's assume that it's him. It puts out this feeling that the spirit of the Izzeddin al-Qassam brigades is still alive, right? So this works hard to promote this narrative of victory. And as I've said, we should soon see more examples of this. Here we see a document that's created and signed by Mohammed Deif. He was the head of the military wing of Hamas, a spot which I guess the guy we saw before is going to inherit if Hamas survives this. This document is very interesting. Remember this document because we're going to go back to it. It has some pretty interesting information in it. But it's supposed to be the document that's been signed, I think, 2 days before the 7th of October that details what the brave warriors of Hamas are supposed to do. Here, there's this whole part in which we see footage of the attacks that Hamas conducted on October 7th. Here's an interesting thing. Many of these footages, I'm going to spare you the details, and I also don't want to get copyright strikes, but a lot of the footage that we've just seen is actually footage that shows Hamas targeting civilians, but just before the civilian is going to get hit or hurt, or just before there is any incriminating evidence that shows that Hamas targeted civilians, the footage gets cut. So we see a whole bunch of shooting and attacking and storming military bases and killing soldiers, right? Because that makes them look good. But when we see the activities in the civilian areas, we just see like a show of force, but we don't actually see any shooting going on. Although me, as an Israeli, of course, I've seen plenty of footage of Hamas shooting at civilians actively. Which, by the way, is another narrative that this document/propaganda film is going to try and push, and I will show you that. Okay, in this part I might be nitpicking, but they are showing, Hamas is sharing footage with Al Jazeera, showing that they have been monitoring and following the commanders of the Gaza division. That's the division that got hit the worst when Hamas invaded, and they are trying to portray it here in this documentary as if Hamas was targeting strictly the Gaza division of the IDF, right? So they're showing here that Hamas actually took videos of the top chain of command of the Gaza division, and the guy that we see there in the middle of the frame is supposed to be Asaf Hamimi. He was the head of the Gaza division, the commander. And in the documentary, they say that they have taken him hostage into Gaza. This is not true, exactly. I mean, this is half true, because Asaf Hamimi actually died in combat on the day of, on October 7th. I happen to remember this because one of the two soldiers who was with him when he fought and died, I happen to know, right? So he's dead, but his body was taken to Gaza. So trying to portray it as if they were able to, with the amazing precision of the Nukhba elite force, they were able to infiltrate into Israel and grab this guy and take him. No, they got into a firefight. They didn't even know it was him. I guess they recognized it way later. This documentary is really concerned with showing how strong Israel is, right? How strong the IDF is. Why would they do that? Because it fits the narrative of having this small, little, brave, freedom-fighting force fighting against overwhelming odds and being so brave and great about it. So what we see here is they count the number of places where the fence was breached and how Hamas was able to take out the Gaza division. So this propaganda piece is very concerned with showing how great Hamas was and how smart they were and how clever they were for overwhelming the Israelis. So the narrative that's pushed for here is a narrative of victory. Hamas was victorious in its military operation, but then there was a genocidal war, which is of course unrelated to that incident, right? There was a genocidal war by Israel, but now that there's a ceasefire, Hamas can be victorious again. So victory, and then, oh no, genocide, and then yay, victory again. That's great. Now we have an entire section talking about how the Israelis were so surprised and they couldn't believe it, and Hamas was so smart and it was so prepared and it did so well. Hamas won, guys, please, please buy our story. Hamas won, please. Don't you see it? Don't you see? But seriously now, it's extremely important for the pro-Hamas propaganda to display a victory, because that shows that you can resist the Zionist pig entity that has stolen Palestine, right? So this is very important, a very important narrative to push. And this narrative of victory also, hopefully for Hamas, and I guess for the Qatari government funding this documentary, is important so that Hamas becomes popular because it beat the damn Jews, and maybe let it survive, maybe recruit more people into it, right? Because a lot hinges on the popularity of Hamas now. If Hamas becomes too unpopular, and if the narrative becomes that Hamas has lost, then it's going to be harder for him to maintain power and control. So we have to push, we as Al Jazeera, we have to push for the narrative that Hamas won. Now we get to another point in this documentary, the idea of ethical warriors. We have this Nukhba guy. Nukhba is the name of the elite force of the Al-Qassam Brigade, which is the military wing of Hamas. he's sitting in front of the camera and he's telling us how they went into the kibbutzim and how they were, they were ethical warriors, essentially. They were under strict orders to target only military installations, but they were so successful that oops, guys, we got into the civilian areas, right? Although they would say that the settler areas, right? Because these people are not entirely innocent, they're settlers, they live on stolen land, right? So we get this entire narrative that Hamas did not want to target civilians at all. It's going to get pretty comical soon, you'll see. But before we move on to hammer the ethical warriors point home, we move on to another point, portraying Tufan al-Aqsa, right, the 7th of October, as actually a preemptive attack. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard correctly. The Zionist pig Jews were actually going to go into Gaza and destroy it no matter what, right? And the brave Nukhba forces only preempted the Zionist attack. Now, it kind of boggles the mind. Like, okay, so the idea that we're supposed to buy is that it was a preemptive strike. But how did it exactly help? Gaza was decimated anyway, all right? So they might say, yeah, we've taken the hostages, and the presence of the hostages inside Gaza, although they would say prisoners, they use the word asra, which translates to prisoners of war, right? But I'll say hostages still. The presence of the hostages in Gaza caused the evil Zionist pigs not to destroy it completely. Anyway, they try to push this narrative here that because Al-Aqsa was threatened, and even the Israelis were smart and sneaky, because the Israelis were trying to improve the economic situation in Gaza, right? And they actually say it here, this Nukhba guy says it. They were trying to improve the economic situation in Gaza. But Hamas are smart. The Jews can't fool them, guys and gals. They can't fool them. So Hamas knew that the only reason that the Jews are being nice to them is so that they can destroy Al-Aqsa and build the third Jewish temple on top of it. Well, I guess the so-called third Jewish temple, because if you're a good Hamas member, you don't even believe that the first two were there. But that's the theory. Guys, that's the theory. Don't you get it? It was preemptive. So to preempt the destruction of Gaza, you went into Israel and you gave Israel the best casus belli that you could think of, right? The best cause for war that you could think of. You preempted them. Good job. Are we supposed to buy this? What the fuck? And they're really trying to push for this here, like the Izzadin guy talks about how they had information that the Zionists were intending to destroy Gaza or attack Gaza. It's kind of crazy. So after having a whole section about this attempt to shift the narrative and call it a preemptive attack, and I guess in a couple of years we'll hear the Arab world and the Muslim world claiming that the Tufan al-Aqsa was a preemptive attack against the evil Jews, but they'll say Zionists when they speak in English, but they will keep saying Jews when they speak in Arabic. Now we move into another section of a guy who was in Kibbutz Be'eri, which was one of the kibbutzim that was attacked and pretty much destroyed, and killing civilians and kidnapping them essentially from their beds. So now we are back to the ethical warriors story, right? How come you guys got into combat in Be'eri and in the kibbutzim? And now this story will shock you. Do you know what the version is? Check this out. So the story that we're being told here is that the Israeli kibbutzim have security delegations or something like that. It's like a special task force that's in charge of security in the kibbutzim. This is true, okay? It's called Kitat Konenut. It's a bunch of, I don't know, old people who, past military age, who have a couple of handguns, and they're in charge of, guarding the kibbutz in case there's any trouble, like a burglary or something. It's not meant to stop a full-scale invasion, right? But it's like a local police force, a civilian police force, something like that. So the story here goes like this. Hamas went into the kibbutz, but they were only trying to maintain order in the kibbutz, of course, right? They were not up to anything shady. But then the civilian security force, in civilian clothing, can you believe they wore civilian clothing? They were hiding inside civilian populations, right? That's the story. They, with their weapons, started shooting at the Nukhbas. And then the Nukhbas were like, oh my God, we have to shoot back. And then this huge firefight started. And add into that they claim that many soldiers and officers from the military bases, which were the legitimate targets to begin with, fled into the kibbutzim. So now there's soldiers and there's warriors in civilian clothing, and you don't know who's who, and then you just start shooting because it's chaos. But the Zionists started it, right? Because they were fighting from within civilian population, which, by the way, is the claim that Israel makes against Hamas, right? They claim that Hamas fights from inside civilian population, but we will soon see how this documentary tries to shift this narrative as well, to show that the Palestinians, the factions, are fighting in the open. They're not hiding behind civilians at all. In fact, it's the Jews who hide behind civilians. And this guy here has an interesting quote that he quotes Mohammed Deif. I remind you, it's the commander. He's been killed since, but he was the commander of the Izzadin al-Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas. And he quotes Deif as saying, "Kill them where you find them, but spare the women and children," right? He quotes Deif as saying that, which is interesting because do you remember the document that we saw before from Mohammed Deif? So this is kind of blurry, but I can find a better photo of this document. And if it's translated, you know what? I'll just show it to you. So I have the Arabic of a 5-year-old, so I'll just use Google Translate so I could translate it faster for you guys. Let's see. Section number 2. So when the promise of the hereafter comes to pass, the promise of the hereafter is the code name that the Palestinian factions gave to the operation that was supposed to finally free Palestine and Al-Aqsa, aka the destruction of Israel. Okay? So when the promise of the hereafter comes to pass, they will disgrace your faces and enter the mosques as they entered it the first time, and destroy what they have exalted with utter destruction. In faith from your brothers in the political and military leadership of the Islamic resistance movement Hamas, the promise of God Almighty, to disgrace the faces of the Jews, which in Arabic it would translate to humiliate the Jews, okay? To disgrace the faces of the Jews and destroy them at the hands of the servants of God, and in certainty the good news of the liberation of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the city of Jerusalem. That's what it says. So, you know, it's not exactly a command to kill them where you find them and spare the women and children. No, it's to humiliate and kill the Jews. That's what it says. I can't believe they're pushing this narrative. It's insane. So we're back to the narrative about them being ethical warriors. The guy who gave the testimony says that he swears he didn't shoot at any civilians. We have footage, by the way, of them looking into the windows and just shooting civilians randomly, like seeing an old person get up, bam, shoot him through the window, done. What else can I say? You know, it's so weird for them to push this. I guess it shows how uncritical the people that this video is meant for are, and it's so successful in trending. Like that's how much people want this story. Now they move on to talk about how they captured a lot of soldiers and they treated them humanely and very nicely in accordance to Islam, of course, in accordance with Islam. But they make no reference to the capturing of civilians except for a hint. And I guess, okay, so here's the thing. Many would not consider the civilians to be civilians, right? Because Israel has a mandatory draft. So basically, because almost everyone has been in the army, these guys are not civilians, they're warriors, right? Because they used to be in the IDF. So this could be one point of them not mentioning the captured civilians. Another reason for maybe not mentioning the captured civilians, the kidnapped civilians, I should say, is that it just wouldn't sound well. So there is no good reason to there's no good reason to show it in a documentary that's pushing for Hamas propaganda. And another interesting thing here actually is that I think what was hinted at here is that they went to the kibbutz, they were trying to be nice, a huge firefight started because of the people in civilian clothing and the soldiers hiding in the kibbutz, and then the IDF came and started bombarding the kibbutzim, and then the noble nukhbas took the civilians to safety in Gaza. So They weren't kidnapped, guys. They were saved from the Zionist pigs of the IDF. Now we move on to the next section of this documentary, which is another point, right? So far we had the narrative of victory, the narrative of ethical warriors, and now we move on to the narrative of, well, Israel is waging a genocidal war. So Tufan al-Aqsa was an operation, a military operation, but Israel's response was a genocidal war. Why is it a genocidal war? Why are Israel doing this? Because they can't beat Hamas. They can't beat Hamas, so this is why they had to wage a genocidal war. So it's like, well, we can't beat these fighters. They're under the protection of Allah or something, I don't know. So I guess we'll go kill as many civilians as we can and just destroy Gaza, and then they will see. And to keep pushing this narrative, we're shown a lot of footage of IDF soldiers being shot at, being killed. So it's supposed to show us that when Hamas are fighting, they're winning, right? Like when Israel is faced with Hamas, Hamas wins. So Israel tries to avoid Hamas and go target the civilian population. So they're trying to combat the narrative that Hamas is hiding in civilian populations. And I don't know, it's maybe in a couple of years that's going to be the main story, right? That's going to be what people believed, which is very sad. And we are shown footage, this was pretty famous, we are shown footage of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, walking around in the open, above ground. This is supposed to propagandize, to be a proof that Yahya Sinwar was not fighting in the tunnels. Guys, he was not in the tunnels. He was up fighting the IDF, but the IDF just wouldn't fight him back. They only cared about killing civilians. That's the story here. Never mind that Israel also found footage of Yahya Sinwar on the day he was killed in the tunnels. I guess, what was it? With his wife, I think, or something? I don't know, I don't remember. So we have this whole narrative pushing for the story that Hamas has been unbelievably successful in Gaza. We're seeing IDF soldiers die and lose, and they're so sad about it, and they're failing. They can't beat Hamas because the spirit of Allah is with them, or something. Well, you know, they don't say it directly, but I've heard a lot of Allahu Akbar here today. Now, they're even showing how Hamas manufactures their own weapons and that they can last forever, essentially, and the IDF is losing. Okay, we got it. Okay, so this part is kind of crazy. You know how the Hamas propagandists spread videos of them shooting down IDF soldiers or vehicles, and they always have this red triangle that they put above them, and now a red triangle has become like a dog whistle for killing Zionists, Jews, right? This video Al Jazeera showed, I'll show you. Check out this frame. It's edited out, right? See the start of the triangle there, and then it's edited out. Al Jazeera edited this part out. Why? Because it looks bad. It looks bad when you shove this red triangle that's associated with killing Jews. So Al Jazeera thought they would edit it out. They just wanted the footage and not the triangle, but they didn't do it well enough, so I can see the red triangle, and the audience, I guess at home, sees the red triangle, and Al Jazeera, on their part, they can be like, no, we're kind of fancy here, we don't do these crude shit. And now we have a bunch of experts, so-called experts, I guess, telling us how Hamas was completely successful, and that there is a lot of turmoil in Israel and a lot of demonstrations, and that Hamas has been so successful that Israel will disintegrate from within in the foreseeable future. So again, that's the victory narrative. So what do we have here? Hamas won, right? Hamas are ethical warriors. Israel is waging a genocidal war. Hamas are not hiding behind civilian populations. Oh, and how can we forget? Tufan al-Aqsa was a preemptive attack on the Zionist entity. They were going to destroy al-Aqsa or destroy Gaza, or I don't know, they were planning something, these sneaky Jews, come on. So this is what I had for you today. I hope you liked it. Well, it's hard to say you liked it, right? But I hope you found this to be helpful, and I guess I'll see you again in the future. Bye-bye.